Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Pierre Wimmer, who's the CEO of Wimmer Financial, a merchant bank specialising in project and acquisition finance within the natural resources industry, as well as other sectors focusing on project debt, equity financing, more so at the BFS and DFS stage or equivalent. Pierre's worked for Goldman Sachs as an executive director earlier in his career, before setting up Wimmer Financial in 2007. And he's going to discuss the company's journey and their future. Pierre will be speaking at the upcoming Minds and Money Connect conference in London on the 25th and 26th of April at the County Hall venue in the heart of Westminster, London. The two-day program is a hub for investors and mining companies to have personal one-on-one meetings and listen to market and analysts, project spotlights and pitch battles during the action-packed event. So go to the link below in the show notes to book your tickets. So let's move on with the podcast, and that's welcome Pierre to this episode. So how are you doing, Pierre?
Great, thank you.
Appreciate your time as well. So as we always start these podcasts off, just wondering if you give us an overview of your career, your background, before we got obviously a series of questions that we'd like to ask you.
Yeah, no, with pleasure. So I studied in the States, up in Boston, and from there ended up joining Goldman Sachs on Wall Street. So we're there during the late 90s, the exciting boom times, and eventually transferred over to London, and I ran the Scandinavian equity business here. Had a couple of other stops, last one at the Man Group, $65 billion hedge fund. And then in 2007, on October 4th, the 50th anniversary of Sputnik, I set up Wimmer Financial, my first company, which on day one was literally my mobile phone, my laptop, and big hopes and dreams. That was it. And here we are, so many years later, and many companies later. Today we have a suite of companies. We have Wimmer Family Office, where we do our principal investments and asset allocations. Have an accounting firm, Wimmer Accounting. We have the merchant banking side, and we're in the process of setting up an equity long-short hedge fund as well in the background. So lots going on at the moment. Certainly haven't been sitting still. And it's been a very exciting and delightful journey.
Yeah. So I just wondering if you can just tell us a little bit more about, obviously, Financial Wimmer as a business, maybe go into the few different businesses that you've got underneath the umbrella. Yeah,
sure, with pleasure. So when we started up initially, we focused heavily on mining. Junior mining stocks, effectively. We initially took a very big theme focus on uranium. And when uranium was very low at $40-45, and then we rode all the way up to $140 on that. So that was a very good journey. And then we later went into rare earths, went into precious, gold and silver. So we've followed sort of the various sub themes over the cycle and over the years. Obviously, China during the early days of our corporate life was a major contributor, going from sort of 5-10% of global consumption to 40% of pretty much all minerals. These days, we have a big focus on precious, base metals and battery metals. We do think there's some excellent drivers there. On the base side of things, I mean, the world needs more base metals. copper, nickel, zinc, etc. On the battery side, I mean, there's a serious shortages particularly on the lithium side, and anything related to the batteries, whether it's manganese or graphite, etc. So those metals have, in our view, very, very strong outlook, and there's a lot to do, and there's a lot of shortage, basically. I think it was Elon Musk who said recently, if you got a lithium mine, you have a license to print money. And I think there's something very true about that. So we're heavily in that. We're a bit late stage. We are at typically sort of project finance focused, BFS, DFS stage. So when the big bucks are needed to go into production, that's usually our sweet spot. Or indeed, if companies are in production already and they're looking to take things to the next stage, either through M&A or further financing, then we're usually quite well positioned there. So we continue to be heavily focused there, but we also have other sectors. We do real estate, industrials, and other sort of hard assets that we understand. But mining is very much still a part of what we do.
Yeah, I wonder if you can just highlight or focus on any of the investments that you've got at the moment, with obviously within the mining resources sector.
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, we're very keen on lithium in particular. We do think there's a very strong outlook there. So that's definitely one of our favorite sectors. Base metals, copper in particular, is a great focus and with an amazing outlook. I mean, basically, there's not enough discoveries. There's not enough big copper projects coming on stream, and the old existing ones are depleting every day. So there is a deficit, and you do need copper for everything. You need it for global cyclical growth, i.e. construction and such like. You also need it in the battery revolution, etc. So those are definitely some of our key areas, in addition to precious gold and silver, which seems to be minting lots of money at current levels.
Obviously, you're involved in other sectors as well. Why do you think mining and resources is part of your strategy? Obviously, I know you said you started off in the mining sector, but why do you focus more on probably mining than some of the other sectors?
Yeah, well, you can't do everything, and it's difficult to be an expert on everything. And just historically, we have focused on and specialized in hard assets one way or another. So hard asset project financing. And that translates into hard asset like real estate, hard asset like industrials, and hard asset like natural resources. That just happens to be an area where we have a lot of expertise and focus and have developed that. What we are not so good at would be everything related to biotech or fintech or deep tech or what all these things are called. So horses for courses, and in this day and age, life is so specialized that you got to sort of zoom in on where you think you have the experience and you can add value. So whilst we can add very little value on, say, the tech side, we can add a lot of value and financing on the hard asset side. And obviously natural resources is well understood how a mine go through its life and life cycle. And the same with real estate. So that's what we focus on, and that's where the whole team is geared up towards.
How is mining different in terms of looking to invest in a particular sector? And what are the catalysts that you sort of look for that you may not seek out in other sectors when you're looking to invest in the mining industry?
Well, first and foremost, we look at it's people. You can have an excellent management team with an average project, and you can be sure that they'll make something special out of it, or they might acquire something and bring something else into it. You can also have a very poor management team with a world-class asset, and you can be pretty much sure that they'll mess it up. So people are absolutely the most important thing. Secondly, obviously, the quality of the asset does matter in mining. The size of it, the grade, the stage of it, etc. But those are sort of things you can analyze. But one should certainly not underestimate the soft side of things. That is a really important factor. In addition to that, we obviously look at the themes, the big themes and big strokes, because they are important. Like I said, particularly on the battery side, we need a lot more of electric vehicles around the world that requires batteries, and you can translate down to how the OEMs are scrambling at the moment to secure their graphite, their lithium, their manganese, all the various elements, the nickels, copper, all the various elements that goes into these batteries. So that is very important indeed. And then finally, I would say, obviously, mining in particular is a cyclical sector very much, and one should be very much aware of that. So it does go through these big cycles where sometimes it gets overheated, where the stock prices might be too high, or it might not be the right time to buy, or things get too frothy. And at other times, you can have very high quality assets with quality management teams trading at a very, very deep discount just because the sector is unliked. So you just got to get the timing right, and look at the cycle. It is a cyclical sector very much.
Obviously, you mentioned you're in real estate, and I imagine many people listen to this podcast, obviously from the mining industry, but also are involved in real estate, whether they own their own home or whether they might have some investment properties. How is the real estate market at the moment? And I know that's a very generic question. And I suppose a lot of people around listen to this podcast are from around the world. But what would you say, or how would you describe the real estate market for now and moving forward?
Yeah, so up until the past 5 years, globally, there's been a bit of a surge in capital values, and cost of capital is very cheap. You could borrow at almost close to 0%. So you'd be silly not to. In my native country, Denmark, you could get 30-year money at 1%. So you'd be silly not to take that. So the sector has gone through a fantastic past 5 years. Now, with the rise of inflation, rise of interest rates, to which the real estate sector is very sensitive, it's obviously a lot more challenging, but it doesn't mean there aren't opportunities. You just got to be a lot more selective. So be a little bit more conservative. People still need a home to live in. So here in the UK, for instance, there's a chronic shortage of normal residential homes and apartments. So there are great opportunities here, and you can get very good returns in some of those, whether they're big projects or small projects. Like you said, some of the mining executives might need to have their own homes and mortgages and refinancing that are coming up because duration is running out. That's also an area we can help out with. We do refinance, mortgage refinance, and things like that, as well as large scale project finance, 100 million, 200 million type of thing. When we look across UK, Europe, and North America, which are the areas we mainly cover on the real estate side, we do find Portugal and Spain in particular being very attractive at the moment. Portugal in particular has very, very strong supply-demand dynamics, and the market is actually super healthy because lots of people are moving there to retire. Even though they canceled the golden visa, there still is a lot of people coming from Brazil, America, UK, Europe, etc. So lots of great opportunities, and I've recently taken a stake in a development project down there precisely for that reason. The dynamics are just fantastic. In Spain, there's an undersupply of debt financing in the real estate space, so that's an area we focus a lot on. But even here in the UK, there still is lots to be done. So we are very active, but you got to know what you're doing, and the bar is a bit higher these days because the cost of capital has gone up, and that means the return profile has to make that cut, as it were.
I just want to move slightly off mining for the moment, and obviously doing some research before recording this podcast. You're expected to be the first private Dane in space as a founding astronaut on Virgin Galactic. I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So apart from mining and the business side of things, I'm also an adventurer and a future astronaut. So yes, my plan is to go to space next year. I am a founding astronaut with Richard Branson's Galactic. I signed up almost 2 decades ago, and have been involved in private space. In fact, I was the very first private European to buy a ticket to space back in 2000. So I started my training all the way back then. I was in a launch pad when Dennis Tito, the very first person, took off from Kazakhstan in 2001, waved him goodbye and wished him a good trip. And started doing my training there. I've been flying a Russian MiG fighter jet as part of my space training. I've sit in the centrifuge in both Russia and in the US, spinning around and preparing myself for space. And I guess my claim to fame to date, pre-going to space, was in 2008 when I did the world's first skydive over Mount Everest. So that was quite exciting, a little bit scary. We looked into climbing Everest, thought it was a bit too dangerous and a little bit too much Russian roulette, and also a lot of people are doing it, so it's perhaps a little bit less special these days. But came up with the idea, if we can't do it bottom up, let's do it top down, and yeah, that led to a world's first. So that's my claim to fame in that regard. But on the space front, we are getting ready. We're doing the final testing on the vehicle at the moment, and it's all going well. And the plan would be that once those testings are done, we're going to go into commercial operations, and sometime next year, I'll fly and I'll become an astronaut.
No, look forward to that time when you are just about to leave. I'll certainly be watching that as well. You've also written a few books, Wall Street, The Green Bubble, and I know you've recently released another book as well. So I just wanted to just give our audience an overview of the books that you've currently written, and I know you're looking to produce another book also.
Yeah, sure, with pleasure. My first book was about the future of European integration. I published it in French. I had a time in the cabinet of the vice president of the European Commission, and obviously had a lot of practical observations from there. And educationally, I studied European political science, so I thought it was good to combine those things, come up with the various models of integration, and put it out in a book format. And for it to be a good challenge, it was published in French, which was difficult as it turned out, but we got there in the end. My second book was published in 2011-12, and that was it was called Wall Street. And whilst it technically was a book about finance, and it was actually more of a book about psychology, and specifically about why we don't learn as a financial community to avoid these bubbles, like the dot-com bubble, the credit boom and bust bubble, etc. So it was a sort of a way to understand what goes on and how come these bubbles keep emerging. And in the last chapter, I talked about future bubbles, specifically the tech bubble and the green bubble. Tech bubble we've seen, and that's now bursting pretty heavily, as we've seen through NASDAQ last year and continuing this year. Ask any VC fund manager, and they'll tell you about life is a lot tougher. But I also mentioned something about the green bubble, and that was picked up by a publisher who said, "Can you actually write a book about this? This is really interesting." And so I did, because 5-6 years ago, policymakers were almost religious about green. As long as it's green, we gotta throw money at it, whether it's commercially viable or not. The tagline of my book is, for green energy to be truly sustainable, it must be commercially sustainable. So it's kind of an economic analysis on various policy areas where we should support, wind, solar, etc., and areas where we shouldn't. So separate these two things into two different groups, and therefore becomes a very helpful policy making tool to what works in the short to medium term and what doesn't. And that really got a great reception in Sweden and Denmark and here in the UK. Yeah, it's available on Amazon. My next book, which is coming out in the next few months, is called The Sky is No Limit, and it's actually volume 1 of my autobiography. So there's a chance to learn about the full story from early days up till sort of halfway, and then next year I'll publish volume 2, which will be called Above the Sky, and it will have some other adventures and great entrepreneurial stories in there. So yeah, those will be my next two books that are heavily in the making. The Sky's No Limit, like I said, is almost done, and we'll be publishing in probably in May, June this year.
Great. We can include some of those books in our show notes, so people can have easy access to purchase them. You mentioned obviously your interest in politics, and at the moment there seems to be quite a lot of instability around the world with various governments. What's your take on everything that's happened more recently, and I suppose how do you see the future playing out over the remaining course of this year and next year?
Yeah, I have become a lot more concerned about geopolitics. We came from an area of relative stability and globalization, global collaboration, to now where it seems like the world is polarizing more and more. You got obviously Russia, China teaming up versus the Western world, sort of in broad strokes. But you even also have more regional conflicts and stuff. So the world has gotten more national, gotten more divided up into blocks, very sadly. So it's going in the wrong direction, unfortunately. We're putting up barriers to trade and politics. So life is not getting easier, and that also translates into economic assessment of projects, because you've got to take politics into account to a much larger degree. We've always looked at politics. I mean, when you look at mining projects in Africa, there are some weak states for sure, and politics is a part of it. But it's usually been limited to that particular leadership or that particular country. Now you have these big geopolitical aspects you also have to take into account, with barriers being put up. Take the invasion by Russia of Ukraine and all the implication that has on the energy market. This is transformational. It's really, really important. So economics are one thing, and project quality is another thing. Geopolitics has now suddenly become a big factor as well, depending on where you're looking at projects. So certainly a very important aspect.
A few more questions. How do you see the outlook for the mining industry over the next, 3 to 5 years, say, for instance, and even beyond?
I think mining has a very positive and bullish outlook. We are going to need more minerals. It is getting harder to find, certainly some of them. So we are going to need more capex. It is going to cost more to extract. There will be more focus on the environmental side of things. That definitely comes up again and again. But fundamentally, there's an enormous appetite and an enormous demand out there, particularly in the battery space. If you just do the economics 101 analysis on supply and demand and estimates from car makers, how much they need, battery storage, and other things, it's not difficult to predict that there's a huge need and demand, and the mining industry is sort of trying to catch up. And in the meantime, the prices are very high. So these mines are likely to be very profitable. Payback time is likely to be very short. So there's a great opportunity. So I'm actually very positive for the outlook for the mining industry for the next 3 to 5 years. Beyond that, let's see what happens. It is a cyclical industry. Things go up and down. So difficult to predict the long term. But certainly on the 3 to 5 year basis, very positive.
You're going to be speaking at the upcoming Minds and Money Connect conference in London on the 25th and 26th of April, which is in probably about 3 or 4 weeks' time. What is your talk going to be about?
We'll talk about some of these themes, particularly on the battery side, that we see. Get a little bit more meat to the bone, if you like, in terms of numbers. But it will be about the outlook, the broad strokes for the mining industry, the opportunities, our focus areas where we think there are great opportunities. Also, some of the concerns. I mean, some of the things to be aware of as a mining company, things to avoid. things not to do, etc. So hopefully we'll give a little bit of advice to fellow investors and to mining executives on how to navigate this. But fundamentally, it'll be a positive input about the positive outlook for the mining sector.
And lastly, as a conclusion, what's the outlook for Wimmer Financial?
I think very positive. We're super busy at the moment. We've just hired some more people, and so we're expanding and broadening our scope here. So honestly, we're super busy, and I think we also have a very positive outlook attached to us. So fingers crossed. Great
to hear. Really appreciate your time, Pierre. Thank you for coming on the podcast to obviously share your information and your wisdom, especially around obviously the mining industry. And also really wish you well. I mean, we'll speak before then, but I wish you well on your space journey. Very, very interesting and intriguing to see how that develops. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they have any questions, they want to follow your journey, buy some of your books, how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, if people want to purchase some of the books, they're available on Amazon. Both the historic books, but also my upcoming book, The Sky's No Limit, is actually available for pre-order on Amazon. So very simply, just go on Amazon. If those who want to talk to me about other things, mining projects, etc., just reach out to via our website, wimmerfinancial.com. There's an email address there, info@wimmerfinancial.com. Send it through there, and we'll pick it up and initiate the dialogue.
Yep, we'll include those in the show notes accompanying this podcast as well, and obviously link to the books as well. So for obviously easy access. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for those that are listening. Very enjoyable episode. A little bit outside of mining also, which is obviously good to listen to, and I hope some of you listening will follow Pierre's journey, especially going into space. If you've obviously got any questions that you want to ask him, feel free to drop him a line also. Appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing this episode and other episodes and the podcast to others within the mining industry, but also other people that you know outside of the mining industry, especially this episode, because we didn't just cover mining, we did look at politics also. So appreciate your continued support, and until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.